discussed with you and shared three words that really stood out to me that we would be focusing on this year. Three words: relationship, discipleship, and leadership. And today I want us to discuss relationships. We might do this a couple weeks, and you might be asking why. Well, to me, the specific reason why on relationships have to do with how we interact with others in a God-centered, Christ-centered way. And here's why, simply. I've probably said this to you many times over the years. Relationships are important for lots of reasons, but today it's important to me because you and I, we will never positively influence any person absent a relationship with them. We'll never influence anyone for Christ without a relationship with them. That's why the soapbox, bullhorn, guy or gal outside of the football, baseball stadium doesn't get any results, because they're barking and yelling at someone rather than having a relationship with them. Our relationship with people, it matters. Let me illustrate it to you this way. Several weeks ago, we had a need in one of the areas in our church, and I said, let me see if I can tackle this. Let me see if I can get involved in something that really isn't mine to get involved in, but let me test something out. And so I called someone that I have a relationship with, and I said, hey, I know you don't normally serve in this area, but we really, really could use your help. When would you be available? Would you be available for the 9 a.m. or the 11 a.m.? And they said, whichever one you need me most for. And so they said yes. And so the interesting thing there is that without a relationship with that person, they would never say yes. Some of you might think, and I can understand this, you say, well, you're the pastor, you have position, you have title, you kind of have some power there. But listen, the people who interact with you and interact with me, they say yes to us, they say yes to God because of our relationship with them. If that makes sense, say, that makes sense to me. So when I started this, I said that relationship is vertical and it's horizontal. So take that example of the individual that I asked to serve in an area. That's horizontal. That's relationships with people. But I want you to notice something, that our obedience to God, when He asks something of us, it functions the exact same way. It's dependent on our relationship with Him. The closer we are to Him, the more likely we are to tell Him yes. The further away we are, the more likely we are to do our own thing and answer how we want. And one of the things that I believe we need to grow in as a church and as a people is our willingness to put self to the side, Jesus at the center, and say yes to Him no matter what the occasion or situation. And I want to suggest to you that the way we come at that is through our relationship with Him. So today, I want to discuss personal relationships, but I want you to kind of do the hard work of seeing how that connects with your relationship with God. Watch this in Matthew chapter 22, verses 36 through 40, verses you're very, very familiar with. They come to Him and they come to Jesus and they ask a question, verse 36. Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law? Like, what's the most important thing that God's word says to us? Let me think this is a question worth paying attention to Jesus' answer on. He's about ready to tell us what's the most important thing in all of Scripture. He says this to them. You should love, or you shall love, the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, everything that you are. We know this. This is the first and great commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So there's an interesting statement. He said you should love your neighbor as yourself. I won't stay here, but there's a bit of an assumption that you do love you. And so many people don't. And it's difficult to love others if you don't even like you. And so I want to look at this and discuss this with you. I read a story that I want to pass on to you. It paints this picture. But before I do that, I want to say something that's critically important. When you think about relationships, I want you to disconnect from the idea that you have to be an extrovert to be good at relationships. Here's what we do. We judge people who are extroverted, who are outgoing. We judge them as good at relationships, and people who are shy or introverted as being bad at relationships. Here's what I've seen. I've seen extroverts who are great at relationships. I've seen extroverts who are awful at relationships. They have no self-awareness. They have no spatial awareness. You were done with the conversation way before they realized you were done because they're just caught up with themselves and want to hear them talk. I've seen both positive and negative. I've seen introverts who are so awkward, I don't even want to ask them what time it is. And I've seen introverts who are very thoughtful, very intuitive, very deliberate about relationships. So please, when I say relationships, don't determine whether a person, you specifically, are good at relationships based on your personality or your temperament. Because all human beings were created for connection. We're hardwired for that, right? So I want you to see that. Now, I've told you this so you would know the answer, but most times, just as an example of this introvert and extrovert, most people at first glance would think I'm an extrovert because I'm up front a lot. I can be good with words. I can also be bad with words, but I seem to be barely outgoing. But honestly, after today, when I have long bouts with people, my friend Janet, who I don't think is in the room at the moment, she gave me this phrase that I've really latched onto. I have my introvert hangover tomorrow. Doesn't mean I don't love people. Watch this. I don't derive a lot of energy. So I say that because this is a sacrifice, and people make sacrifices that you may not know based on how they're wired. I love people, but it just takes me a lot of energy to do that, right? And like there's nothing like being in my living room on a cold, wintry, cloudy day on the couch with a fire going and NFL playoff football. Like that's my dream on a Sunday afternoon. No one knocking on my door, everyone leaving me alone, just being able to chill out. Now that might be your nightmare. Here's all I'm saying. It isn't about right or wrong, likeness or dislikeness, similarities or not. It's about you beginning a journey of self-awareness of who you are and not pigeonholing someone based on what you see on the outside. Does that make sense? Yeah, so a traveler nearing a city asked an old man seated by the road, "What are the people like in this city?" The old man says, "Well, what were the people like where you came from?" "Horrible," the traveler reported. "Mean, untrustworthy, detestable in every aspect and every respect." "Oh," the old man said, "you will find the same thing in the city ahead." Scarcely had the first traveler gone on his way when another stopped to inquire about the people in the city ahead of him. Again, the old man asked, "What were the people like in the city you just came from?" "They were fine people, honest, industrious, generous to a fault," declared the second traveler. "I was sorry to leave." The old man responded, "That's exactly how you'll find the people here." My first point this morning is this: who we are determines how we see others. The way people see others is a reflection of themselves. Jesus says it this way in Matthew chapter 6, verse 22 and 23. "The lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness?" Here's what he's saying, that if I'm a trusting person, that's how I'll see people. If I'm a critical person, that's how I'll see others. If I'm a caring person, I'll see others as compassionate. And who we are comes through in everything that we do. There are 5 components that shape our perception. The first one you cannot do anything about: genetics. You are who you are. I actually just had a wellness check with my physician. I've done it for the last 3 years. In fact, I had to be told by our board of overseers that that was a requirement for me. They started this several years ago. They said, Josh, you have to go get an annual checkup with blood work and all of these sorts of things. I don't know why that is. This could be a stereotype, but I think generally men have to be told to go to the doctor because they don't like it, I suppose. And so I had to be told. This year was an unbelievably discouraging year for me in my annual checkup. My blood work is perfect. It's really good. My sugar's good. And cholesterol's right. And all those things. But my doctor informed me this year that they moved. This is too much information, but it's okay. They moved the colon screening from 50 to 45. I'm 46. Praise the Lord. Genetics cannot be changed. He talks to me about that. The day I had a heart attack, the thing that saved me from being sent home was the doctor's awareness that my genetics cannot change. And here's what he said. Number one, you're a male. You're more predisposed to heart disease than others. Second, your family history. Your genetics are what they are. You were hardwired and came into this world with certain talents, gifts, abilities, temperaments, mindsets, so on and so forth. Now, some of those things can change, but some cannot. And so, when you see the world, understand that it was shaped by your genetics, your self-image, your life experience, your attitude and choices about those experiences, which can be changed, and your friends, which should regularly be monitored and changed. Everyone in here who's raised teenagers, or is raising teenagers, or will raise teenagers, become acutely aware how much it matters who they hang out with. But adults slip into denial and think that we outgrow the need to weed out and change friends. Do you remember Schultz and his cartoon, The Peanuts? Anybody old enough? Anybody old enough to remember when they used to bring you the Sunday funnies to your door? Wasn't that cool? I was a paper boy, and I remember that. And Charlie Brown was always hassled by this friend named Lucy. Lucy was a bad friend. And on one occasion, as became the theme, Charlie Brown is discouraged. And Lucy offers advice. Here's what she says. The reason you're discouraged, Charlie Brown, is because you're you, Charlie Brown. It would have done Charlie Brown some good to find someone else who could have done what Proverbs says. In Proverbs chapter 27, verse 17, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Now understand that there's a fine line between just telling someone what they always want to hear and helping them be stronger, healthier than when you found them. But here's the deal. As a human, you know internally when someone's helping you or criticizing you. And if it's always criticism, you're probably dealing with a person who sees the world through the lens of who they are, which is a critic. And critics are good to make us better at times, but it has to be a proper proportion to those who are around us, encouraging us and lifting us up. And so find that difference. As a sub-idea, we as a church have always endeavored to leave people healthier and stronger than we found them. Whether they stay here, whether you stay here for forever or not, here's what our prayer is, that we leave you healthier and stronger than when we found you. So many churches beat people down and leave them weaker than they found them, and that's just simply not our heart. We don't always do well at that, but it is definitely an endeavor. So the first point was, who we are determines how we see others. If you're doing good, say, I'm doing good. Okay, listen to this. This story resonated with me. I was actually, Fridays I'm off, most Fridays, and we have Charlie, our Charlie girl, not Charlie Brown. We have Charlie on Fridays, and someone gave Audrey this stack of books. And I read Charlie this book called How to Babysit Grandpa. And so as a grandpa, this story I read just like really stuck with me. And I know many of you are not even close to grandparenthood, and I understand. But this story tickled me. A grandpa with a mustache was babysitting two of his grandchildren, and he fell asleep. And as he fell asleep, his grandchildren put a piece of Limburger cheese in his mustache. Then they hid around the corner waiting for him to wake up. When he woke up, he sat up and said, "Man, something stinks in here." So he gets up and leaves the room thinking it's something in the living room, and he goes to the kitchen. He says, "My goodness, something stinks in here." So he goes outside and just totally frustrated says, "My God, the whole world stinks." What's the moral of the story? To a person with Limburger cheese in his mustache, everything stinks. The good news, though, is this. Grandpa can get the cheese and that foul smell out from underneath of his nose. But someone with foul stuff on the inside of them has a more difficult challenge. Point number 2. The first person we have to examine is ourselves. The moment Grandpa went and looked in the mirror, he saw what the issue was. Luke chapter 6, verse 41 says it this way. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own? One translation says, why don't you deal with the 2x4 in your own eye? Isn't it interesting that we judge others by their actions, but we judge ourselves by our intentions? When really, in relationships, one of the things that matters is examination of self. What is your heart and soul doing? The impact of our attitudes have a massive impact on others. Galatians chapter 6, verse 4 says this, each one should test their own actions. This is looking in the spiritual mirror. The first person, guys, that I need to know after Jesus is me. The first person I have to get along with is me. The first person to cause me problems is me. The first person I have to change is me. The first person that can make a difference in my world is me. And all of those apply to you as well. So often, we don't get along with others because we don't get along with us. Which leads me to the third point. Hurting people, you've heard this before. Hurting people hurt people and are easily hurt by them. Let me just say this to you. The world is filled with hurting people. Look at the difference, and let's discuss the difference between healthy people and hurting people. Healthy people, in my estimation, are more willing to change. Hurting people are less willing to change. Healthy people are more willing to admit failure. Hurting people are less willing to admit failure. Healthy people are more willing to discuss issues. Hurting people are less willing to discuss them. Healthy people are more willing to learn from others. Hurting people are less likely to learn from others. Watch this. Healthy people are more willing to do something about the problem, while hurting people are less willing to do something about the problem. Lastly, healthy people are able to travel light. Hurting people often carry a lot of baggage. There are many hurting people around us. And this is important on the aspect of relationships, because if we don't understand how to interact with them, we'll miss it. Hurting people often hurt people. Hurting people are often hurt by people. Hurting people often hurt themselves. How do you break the cycle, right? How do you break this cycle? I'm going to ask you to do some things that are not going to be easy. I'm going to give you 4 quick ways before we finish on how to deal with hurting people. Number 1, if you're taking notes, when they lash out at you, don't take it personally. That's so hard. Isn't that so hard? In over 20 years of helping people who are hurting, I have been the brunt end of their hurt. Not telling a sad story. Sometimes there was maybe a legitimate cause for them to maybe lash out at me. But can I just tell you, over the whole, a lot of irrational hurt comes to people who are in people's lives. You have to remind yourself, this isn't about me, it's about them. And not in a deflective way, not in a way that says, oh, they're all messed up, but in a way that kind of taps into empathy and care. Wait a minute. And let me give you a verse of scripture that has always brought me comfort when I've had to deal with someone who was hurting and who maybe was hurtful. It's one of the greatest bit of wisdom that I know of currently in dealing with hurting people. It's what Paul says when he says these words: we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. Our fight isn't with people. So the next time someone lashes out at you and you feel hurt, say, wait a minute. There's something going on below the surface, perhaps, that's more significant, and there's more to this than meets the eye. Let's find out what that is. I read a story about a man who, early on in his pastoral experience in a church, every week he would get a letter in the mail, and it was a transcription of his sermon. And in the margins, there was red pen correcting his grammar and at times his theology. How long could this go on, you may ask? The pastor that I know said this happened every Sunday for 7 years. He went to the individual, spoke to them, shook out his hand to shake his hand, and the man refused to shake his hand. Here's what that pastor that I know conveyed. There was something inside of the man who was writing those things that was hurting. And his heart became to pray for that individual and figure out how he could bring healing to the situation. So often we just want to fire back. Isn't that easy? Isn't that the easy thing to do? I don't know if you're this way, but the carnal nature in me, the side of me that lacks sanctification and spirituality, when someone calls me a name, I want to call them a couple names back. But that's just your human nature. And that is never meant to dominate us. Now, we all lose that battle from time to time. But the goal is to win it at a more regular pace and rate than we lose it. And so, don't take it personal by remembering we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. There's something spiritual going on. Second, look beyond the person for the issue. Third, look beyond the situation. And 4, do your best to not add to their hurt. If you deal with difficult people on the job, or in your home, or in your church family, can I ask you to consider something? Don't add to their hurt. Now, there's a lot of layers to this, because there is something that's hurting them that needs to be resolved. Watch this. To go all the way back to the very first thing that I said to you. You'll never influence anyone for Christ absent a relationship with them. It's a cliche that says this: people don't care how much you know till they know how much you care. Don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Then you can begin to get into someone's life through that relationship. Isn't that kind of what God's done to us and for us? As we draw near to Him, He draws near to us. Try this. Proverbs 15:1. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. I want to finish this question. So, what if you're the hurting person? What if it's you? Here's the key. In my experience, a lot of people, they just want a quick fix. Something to give them a moment of relief in their pain. This is why a lot of times we lash out. Because it makes us feel better temporarily. Others may not use anger or words. Others can use alcohol or food or sex or something else to lessen that pain. Find the words of Kevin Myers appropriate here. If you truly want to become well, you need more than a fix. You need to become fit. People who seek emotional fitness, they don't look for just a temporary relief. They search for the real thing that's wrong and ask God to help them make it right. So how can you tell if you're making progress? This is very important. People who are searching for a fix, stop working as soon as the pain or pressure is relieved. But people seeking fitness continue doing what's right to improve themselves long after the discomfort is gone. It's why people like me gain weight. You get to your goal and you stop doing what's right and you revert back to the way you were and maybe even worse before you started. We can see that externally. But what about internally? The things that we do that bring the relief, do we stop them once the problem seems to be temporarily fixed? Or do they become a part of our habit, our discipline, our spirituality, our life? I want to challenge you today. Love on hurting people. Be sure you examine yourselves first. And never disconnect from who you are is how you'll see others. And watch your relational health get stronger and stronger. It's important to me that we cultivate relationships. We cultivate them vertically and horizontally.